an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering Of Darkness and Dawn. The Elder Empire Shadow Book 2, Chapters 6 and 7. In these chapters, y'all, I know that, we've been around these elders. We've seen things they can do, the horrifying islands made out of their body parts. But I don't know why. It wasn't until these chapters that I grew really genuinely, afraid of them in a whole different way. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. Thank you very much to George for commissioning this episode and for being flexible because I had to move the recording. I also really kind of feel like it worked out well because I re-listened to these chapters today. I read them yesterday, and yesterday was just it was a mess of a day in a variety of ways. And I realized when I was thinking about it this morning, I was like, I feel like things didn't quite sink in places, and I'm sure you guys know what I mean, where your mind is so preoccupied that you will read a paragraph and realize you didn't actually retain anything. And I had the broad strokes I remembered, but I was like, but wait, how did that work? And I was like, all right, I'm gonna reread it. And I'm really glad I did, because there were a few things, especially in chapter 6, that I don't think I was getting. And chapter 6 is the one that, as much as chapter 7 is a big, dramatic elder impact on a whole town, it's genuinely it is very terrifying. There is something about the understated quality of the issue in chapter 6 that makes me more frightened. And I think what it is there's and this really anybody who is American and lives within our medical care system is probably going to get what I mean here. It's one thing to be in a town and you're being experimented on or whatever it is. You're experiencing something and everyone around you is also experiencing it. That is horrible, but there's also a sense of we're all in this together, and there was nothing to be done. Nobody was getting away from this happening to them if they lived here. But what happens in chapter 6, it's specifically mentioned that the household they are low income enough that they aren't able to afford a reader to check into things until it gets really bad. And look, I'm just saying, as somebody, I recently got insurance because of getting married, and it is truly just changing everything because we live in a hellscape. And just the whole idea of leaving something and not getting it properly maybe inspected before you buy it, or there's something that's going on health-wise and you're it'll probably just go away. And sometimes it does. But you just leave it, and then when it gets really bad, you're suddenly facing, catastrophe. It's just too fucking relatable, man. There was something about it that felt very, very real in a small, everyday sense. And the fact that this woman is alone with these children, it seems like the father isn't mentioned, so I'm assuming he's not part of this. And that they are, she's not even certain how to care for them because they're not eating or drinking or anything. It was such a small scale catastrophe. All of her children, all 3 of them, really horrifying. And the kind of thing that if she had been slightly higher income, maybe this wouldn't have happened to her or them, George is in the chat. He says, my new job insurance starts on July 1st, and I think I'm going to cry when I finally get it, LOL. So excited to still spend a ton of money, but hopefully not go bankrupt. Yeah, look, what's wild, too, is, I mentioned that I got the insurance because of getting married, and Owen he has like this break because of his work not providing insurance. So it's like private pay, but they give you a little bit of like a discount, however that works. And when we got married, the monthly payment went down with me on it. So they're covering 2 people instead of just the one, but it went from like $350 a month to like $275 a month. You can't tell me that this shit is not crazy. Like, I'm sorry. Look, I know that there's meant to be like, you know, there's actuaries that could tell me all the reasons why it is the way it is. I don't want to fucking hear it. Can we just take care of people and stop with this bullshit? But yeah, I went and picked up my prescriptions the other day. Normally would have cost me like $180. Guess how much? It was $0, literally. Like, it just doesn't make any sense, y'all. Why are we like this? Anyway, I'm sorry. I always somehow start dipping into socialism when I cover Will White's stuff. And I don't really know. I think that he may not be socialist. I don't know. So I feel like if he's listening to these, he might be like, she is getting a lot of shit from this that I don't mean. And I'm sorry. I'm sure I am, because I just put my own thing on it, as we all do. But anyway, so yeah, this whole thing in chapter 6 feels really, really scary, because it's like, she's so alone and so out of her depth, and genuinely there isn't anybody that could tell her what was happening here. And this dude comes in and he doesn't know either, and he has to like, I really enjoy this character though. So it starts off with a little summary of the conversation that happens when apparently he was younger. It's not clear how small he was when it happened. It's just that he's been being called a grandson. So I'm picturing him at like 12, 13 years old, but people are grandsons no matter what their age. So I don't know. But it says, I'm sorry, Guildhead, there is no more that I can do for him. Is everything still there inside, or is he one of them? And they say, no, he's there. It's just a veil. His mouth, his eyes, his brain, they all still exist. It's simply that they're not here. Where are they then? If you love your grandson, Guildhead, please don't ask him that question. I don't like it. Okay. So Darius Albright is the name of this character. And Darius gets on my good side several times here. But my favorite is when he's just like, I don't know, do you have any ideas? Like, he isn't trying to pretend he knows what is going on here. He isn't walking in with the air of complete authority. This is how, honestly, medical professionals should work more. And look, I know that there's a huge issue with people self-diagnosing from WebMD, but there are times where we know what we're feeling and people don't want to listen and they don't ask questions. I have had that happen several times and wound up finding out that, oh yeah, you do have a genuine facial twitch. That's something neurological that we should probably like find a way to deal with. And the first doctor I went to for that, guys, he told me that I should drink Gatorade for the electrolytes because that would probably help. And he charged me $150 and sent me home, and that was his advice. Anyway, so Darius is like just up in here. First of all, he's trying to be comforting and like smile at her, even though he does not have a face anymore. And he is listening and asking questions. She's suggesting some things that she thinks it could be, and he investigates all of them because why wouldn't he? It's not like he has his own idea, you know? And all of his vibe in this chapter, I just really liked. He feels like such an honest, I'm trying to do good kind of person. And then what is happening is so creepy. So he calls them triplets initially. And when he asks their mom, are they triplets? She's like, you wouldn't even have had to ask me that a few days ago. So it's like they're slowly growing to be more like similar to one another, because he touches one of them and he can feel the weight loss in one and the gain in the other. Like they're redistributing their appearances. so that they begin to match. And I don't know why. I don't really need to. There is something about that samification that is just disturbing. And it's unclear to me if they undo it. Like if they, obviously I'm not expecting that he is able to get them out of this sort of trance and they just like suddenly return to how they used to look. But it's not mentioned whether or not they will continue to look the same going forward, or if as time passes they will return to how they used to look. I am going to go with they probably will look like the way they look now forever. That this is maybe a permanent change, because he's really, by the end of this, he's like, they're not getting out of this without some effects. They can make it through and they can live their lives, but it's certainly going to like stay with them in some ways. And that might be part of it. So yeah, she was not poor, but just humble enough that the mother couldn't afford a reader to catch this months ago, which is precisely when it should have been dealt with. And so these girls, they sat motionless and stared at the wall, whispering in sync with one another. When they blinked, their eyelids fluttered in time, and a quick check confirmed that even their hearts beat together. Something had bound these girls into one, and he was afraid to open his reader's senses to find out what. If he read them carelessly, there would soon be a fourth figure staring and whispering, and Darius doubted he would look good in a nightgown. So, just, y'all, such a creepy image right out of the gate. I have to say, I just keep being so impressed with, like, Will's range, because he is writing some genuine horror shit in these books, and it is fucking, it's fucking with me. It just is. Like, there's the big bombastic horror, like body horror type stuff of the islands, but this is so much subtler, and it's something that could, I feel like, really get in your head. And especially, like, if you have pets, I'm sure I'm not alone in having one of them just staring at a wall, and I bet there's a bug, I bet there's something, but it can really creep you out where you're just like, what do you see, though? Like, what is that? And the idea of there being 3 children, not only both, like, all of them staring, but whispering, and their whispering is in sync. It's not said what they're saying, and I would suspect that they're not even, like, speaking English, but, well, they're probably not speaking English in this universe, but you know what I'm talking about. It is just a unsettling, like, the whole idea of it. We've already got creepy twins in our, like, pop culture, but the triplets thing, especially when they didn't start out looking like triplets, much more effective in my opinion. So he asks about how old they are, and he does say that because they are young, their minds may still be flexible enough that they won't be permanently broken or affected in a way that is, irrevocable. I always have trouble with that word. So, yeah. He could have made up something comforting to sound like he knew what was going on, but he preferred the honest approach. He just says, huh. And I find that just really funny. He didn't believe in deceit, by and large. Deception, illusion, and seduction were the ways of the elders. And I thought that was a really interesting approach. He's not even just like, well, that's unethical. It's more, that is the thing that these creatures who took my face, that's their hallmark. I'm not doing anything like what they do. You know what? Honestly, that's a pretty good, like, way to live. And it was interesting here because I had just been thinking, after the last section that I covered, how funny it is that they're called elders, which is, I think it's an effective name and it works, but it's also the kind of thing that makes it sound so much more innocuous than it really is. And then she says, I don't know anything about the other side. And it says, he supposed she meant elders. It seemed like there was a new euphemism for the creatures in every town and hamlet then again, the word elder itself was almost a euphemism, wasn't it? Far easier and faster than to say evil, unknowable horror. Yeah, it's just, the elders aren't really well defined within these books. And I don't mean like within the universe. It's more that they are all capable of such different things, and they are unknowable in a way that is like, they seem to like not get along with each other either. There's just a kind of like constant conflict surrounding them, and I don't grasp it, but that's part of what makes them feel effective, which is not usually how that works. Usually if I want to be afraid of a villain, I need to sort of like understand what they're after. And I think that the chaos of these guys is what makes them so frightening, because you just don't know where they're going to go, how they're going to zero in, what effect they're going to have. Like, so what we find out here is that there is a corner in this room where no sunlight ever reaches. And basically what this amounts to for me is that this elder influence built up in this area somehow, because the sun never shined on it. It's like the shadow takes on form because of the repetitive nature of sunlight hitting the rest of the room and not there. It's almost like the effect of intent on objects, where you talk about, how much somebody wanted a tool to do a certain thing, and so it becomes even better at doing that thing because you have invested it with your constant use of it. It's almost like that happened with the shadow, but as a side effect of nature. It wasn't intentional. It had no real human influence other than the fact that a human being built the house. And yet it just takes on its own life, which is like, there's no helping that. It feels like it's an accident. And that is terrifying. Basically, the elder influence feels like it's low-key a household pest that you need to nip in the bud, like a really bad kind of bedbug. And, if you don't deal with bedbugs immediately, that shit will take over your entire home. So it's like you have to zero in on that shit quick and deal before it can really begin to like fester and evolve. I hate it. I really I didn't know. He talks about elder invested objects. That is a knowable thing. It is an object that somebody has purposely done something to. It is something that is intended to be terrible and evil, right? Here it is. In his experience, elder-related artifacts tended to look exactly as menacing as they were. The lucky stone would be shaped like a skull. The book would be bound in human skin. The mirror would have a black frame and would whisper threats throughout the night. But that was only for elder artifacts. Heavily invested items could cause just as much harm, and they could look like anything. So, this shadow... Before he could stop himself, he raised a hand to his face, or rather, where his face used to be. Now there was only darkness. The hunger of Urgnaut was endless and insatiable. With a ring that filled the room, Darius drew his sword. It seemed to catch light from nowhere, gleaming like silver in the candlelight. So, this is really interesting. He draws this sword, and this is part of what I didn't really understand was happening in the first read. He tries to touch one of the girls with the flat of the blade. He sort of slaps her on the cheek with it. And it doesn't have an effect. Like, the contact with her doesn't work. It's that he has to attack the shadow. And he stepped out, reaching over the girls and driving his sword down into the floorboards. The creeping shadow was hungry, and his hatred of life could not be extinguished. But in the end, he still did his work in the absence of light. And I didn't understand initially that the sword is what he is reading, because it goes from there to Darius's mind sank down into the metal of the blade. And I should have caught that, but that was one of those moments where I had like just sort of spaced out just enough to go right from the creeping shadow was hungry and then into the explanation of the investment of the blade. So I was like, wait, what's happening here? What it is that there is somebody who makes a blade that glows, and the guy is an alchemist who is low-key kind of like a fraud. And he is desperate to make some kind of metal that will glow. And then it's found, this like piece of metal is found by a prisoner. He has been kept from execution for years, but he's beginning to consider begging for it. They keep him in the dark all the time, well fed and watered, but starved for light. Only now, once a year, do they release him. He stumbles from his cave and into the dawn, clutching a bar of steel that he finds sitting on the grass. He will be allowed sunlight for exactly as long as he can hold on to that metal. As soon as he lets go, or when night falls, he will be returned to his cell. Let me keep the sunlight, the prisoner begs. Just a little while longer. Keep the darkness from me. So, it's a weird, like, the guy made this sword, the alchemist, and somehow it winds up on the ground outside. No details on that. Doesn't really matter. This guy finds it, and it's when the way that it says he will be allowed sunlight for exactly as long as he can hold on to that metal. I couldn't tell if that was like a figment of his thought, his belief, if he saw the light coming off of it and realized what it was, or I was just unclear exactly like how precise that is and how metaphorical it is, I guess is what I'm saying. And the desperation to keep the light and keep the darkness away means that this sword now, this blade, is all about dispelling darkness and making it disappear. In his hands, the invested blade flared like a star. The corner of the household saw sunlight for the first time since the home's construction, and the girls reacted instantly. They hissed back, crawling away from the light on their hands and heels, scrambling away from the blinding luminescence. And one of the girls comes at him, and he grabs her and basically does like kind of an exorcism. And he adds something. He flicked the girl's forehead with a single finger, sending his intent into her body. For an instant, he glimpsed the vision she and her sisters had shared. A black, endless void, so vast that it could swallow all of humanity. But it was not empty. He could sense, could feel, could practically taste the unnameable entities that swam in that darkness, only an inch from touching his skin. They hungered. Yo, I am sorry, but that is dope as fuck. That description of they swam in the darkness is so much creepier. You could have used any word. And swam, there's something about things that feel like they are from underwater that really makes them seem alien, you know? And we know that a lot of the elders do live like under the water, like that's part of their deal. But that being described for the void is different. And it just, the fact that they're like an inch from his skin, blah, nope, don't like it. The vision broke like glass, shattered by resolve and reality. Now he would only see that void when he closed his eyes, as always. Yo, rude. That's how he lives? Like, he says, shoo. And she opens her eyes and she sees him and starts to cry. And the other girls sort of wake up from it as well. And then he pulls out this pen and he draws 3 tallies onto his arm. 3 lives saved that would have otherwise been lost. A good reminder. We don't get told how many tallies he has already. But the fact that he is tracking this in this manner is very interesting to me, because that says it's really important to him to know and have this constant reminder, which part of me is like wondering if he feels that he has to make up for something, like atonement, or if this is like meant to be, I could easily kill myself because this is a bad way to live. But if I have this reminder of the lives I've saved, it encourages me to not do that, because it would certainly ease my own suffering, but then other people would be out here with nobody to help them. I kind of feel like it would be that, because I've got to say, if you see an endless horrifying void every time you close your eyes, suicide has got to start looking pretty like appealing. I just have to assume. And it says, it was his system. It helped him remember why he had never jumped ship to a different guild as well. And that we see a little bit later as well, some of the like policies of the guild that he is with. And so certainly you can understand why he was ever tempted to maybe just bounce. So he tells the mom, they're alive, but I have made it, and if I have, they can. And he's surprised because when he shows them his lack of face, he expects like maybe somebody to freak out, but they don't. Instead, the mom is just kind of like, okay, yeah, and like seems encouraged by it. And I really like that, realizing that this man who came in and like saved your whole family is somebody who was touched by this darkness, and he's still out here doing amazing, good things. That has to help. So this is when he steps outside, and there is this pilgrim out there. This pilgrim carrying Meditations of the Unknown God. And it says a white sun medallion, just a little larger than good taste would suggest, which I do like that detail. It's just towing the line on that ostentatious sort of thing. And the pilgrim is like, yo, we really shouldn't like let them live though. They were touched by something that could basically like infect them and hatch from their bodies as something worse. And Darius is just like, no, we're absolutely not fucking doing that. They survived. It's delightful. And might I suggest that next time you wait for me to confirm before you go in there and try to read them funeral rites. And it turns out this dude has 3 coffins with him. So I don't know how this would have gone if this guy got his way. Would they just stab the girls in the heart? Like, how would they kill them? And would they do it in front of the mother? Would they ask her to leave and then be like, we're so sorry, we tried, but there was no saving them? Like, I really want to know what the procedure is for handling it the way he intended to. And he says, you take the day off. I'll register this assignment as completed. Meanwhile, 3 boxes are going to float out to the Aeon where they belong. And as he's saying, this sounds like a wonderful afternoon, doesn't it? He's thinking about the fact that their method of killing these girls might actually be right. It might be the right thing to do, because some people never actually recover. And then there's this line, or spiraled downwards until they were worse than human. Worse than human. That's kind of an amazing line. Just like, imagine. And as he says what a great day it would be, it sounds like it could be, behind him he hears a woman say, "That sounds nice. I'd like to tag along if you don't mind." And he turns around and sees Shara. And he has a moment of just like ready to piss himself fear, because he recognizes what she is immediately. But her vibe is so like relaxed and chill that he sort of realizes, okay, she's not going to do anything, because if she had been intending to, I wouldn't have seen her coming, because clearly she's soulbound and she is terrifying. And I had sort of like, the fact that this is happening with her in the present surprised me. I didn't think that we were in the present. I thought we were going to find out, that this was like, I don't know. But the fact that she's here and she's soulbound already, and they're already talking about, the regents, that there have been assassination attempts, some successful apparently. I wasn't expecting that. So they have a little like back and forth between her and him. Like, he's evaluating her. She's sort of grinning at the fact that she can feel him evaluating her, and he holds a hand out to shake in such a way that she has to take her hand off of her like soulbound blade, and she immediately replaces her hand, and he's like, okay, so she doesn't like being separated from that. And when she says the region of the East has been assassinated, attempts have been made on the life of at least one other, he kind of flips out. It says, Darius's stomach lurched and the void closed around his vision. He had to grip the side of the cart to steady himself. He wasn't yet 40, but his joints seized up, pain shooting through his spine. And when he comes back to himself, he's sort of like, because Shara does not seem particularly fazed by this reaction. So he says something about how he's pleasantly surprised by her attitude, because consultants often like to present themselves as like cold and, completely without feeling. And she says, I've never thought so. That sounds more like my partner. And he glanced to his right, and a monster stood inches from his face. It was a consultant, but he still suspected she might be some kind of elder spawn fiend. Her skin was corpse pale, her hair almost the same shade, her eyes an odd pinkish color that reminded him of a rabbit. The black half-mask covering her mouth gave her the appearance of a black-shrouded ghost, and her hands were the worst of them all. From her fingers extended 6-inch claws of sharp iron. And she says, I'm sorry for startling you, but let me tell you guys, in the audiobook, this bitch does such a good job with this woman's voice. I had forgotten. I'm sorry for startling you. It's like that, but somehow less like forced sounding. It really does genuinely sound like a terrifying voice. And every time I hit it, I was just like, oh God. And I really enjoyed that he says charmed, startled and a little skittish still, to be quite honest, but charmed nonetheless. And I don't know why, but that delighted me for some reason. He's just so much like, all right, I have no face, so I guess I'm just going to roll with it, but I can't lie, that is very scary. And he's sort of taken aback at the fact that her and Shara are so like normal with each other, and has to remind himself, yeah, but they're consultants and they don't give a fuck about other people. They're going to do what's best for them. And he turns and says something like, I know a place to hire a horse, and he turns back and both of them are gone. So I don't know what it was they were doing there or why they came to talk to him, if what happened to these 3 girls attracted their attention somehow and they were here investigating it as well and sort of watching what he did. but I find it very interesting, you know? And I also, just for the sake of interest, I had forgotten about Ayana, because when I hear the description of this woman, the rest of her didn't match. But the fact that she has, like, the claws on her fingers, I was like, oh, okay, well, this is Maya. Maya? Is that her name? Yeah. But no, because hers retract. Hers aren't iron. So I had forgotten, because we met Ayana, like, early in the first book, and I don't recall seeing her that often after, and I may be just not remembering. I'm sorry. George has, like, a couple of things here. The prisoner part is so interesting to me. Who is keeping him? Was this to invest the bar of metal so powerfully they wanted his intent to seep into it? His desperate desire for Sun? George. That never occurred to me, that they, like, purposely kept him from it. And then they told him, as long as you hold it, you get to be in the sun. And so, George, that's definitely it. That never even occurred to me. That's fucked up. Wow. That's fucked up. I can't believe I didn't think of that. Because I don't want to think of them doing a thing like that on purpose. I want it to be like a side effect of an imprisonment for something that's, like, deserved and reasonable, you know. And for all I know, it fucking is deserved and reasonable. And this is just something that they were like, well, we've got this fucking prisoner. Why don't we do this awful thing? But Jesus, that's definitely what was going on. Thank you. That makes that a lot more clear now. It didn't occur to me at all. I'm such a child sometimes. And I think the alchemist made the alloy, like the chunk of metal, not the final sword. Right. So it's just a bar of, like, random, which makes more sense, because they're not going to give a fucking prisoner a blade. Like, yeah. Okay. All right. I like it. Thank you, George. All right. So we go to chapter 7 here. And they are standing outside the town of Silverreach. It had once supervised the sea trade for the town, but coastal ships stopped here less and less until the only visitors were carried by the Navigators Guild. Since navigators had no need of lights to guide them to shore, the lighthouse had been left to nature. And it's 9 years ago here. So it's the full crew. We've got Maya and Shara and Lucan and the Emperor. And they are investigating this area because there is something weird going on that isn't really, like, specific quite yet. And the Emperor says Lucan's name and just sort of leaves it for him to, like, stop and put his hand down on the ground and read it. I love this moment here because he's in the middle of reading it. And Maya is still saying maybe the lines of communication were interrupted. Maybe the watchman was killed, and that's why they never heard back from him. Shara nodded to Lucan. He'll have the answer in a minute, why guess? Maya shot her an irritated look. What else am I supposed to do? I cannot tell you guys how much I identify with Maya sometimes. She is such a rule follower and such a, like, just likes to sort of think aloud, and she's smart, but she is so unquestioning that it can get her into trouble. There's a point later on where they're told to leave the Emperor alone. And Lucan is worried because he thinks that the Emperor could potentially be at risk. And Maya is just like, we were ordered to leave him. And that's all that's all she needs. She just needs to be given a direct order. And she doesn't question any further whether this is a smart decision, whether it's 100% I will do what I'm told. And there is a certain comfort in that. You know what I mean? Like, I am somebody who questions certain things. I certainly recently in my life have questioned a lot more. But growing up, like being brought to church with my dad, I would question things a lot, and he did not like that, unsurprisingly. But thinking about it, I have really been someone who followed the rules most of my life and respected authority telling me, don't do this thing. Because I figure if there was a rule made for it, then okay, probably there's a good reason not to do it. And the idea of just, I can trust the people in authority is so comforting. And it's just such a shame as you start to learn how untrue that is. There's no real feeling of security in that somebody has things under control. You just have to face the fact that everybody's just making shit up, and a lot of the people who made certain rules were bad people with poor intentions and biases and just like horrific backgrounds in their own lives. And it's just really upsetting. But Maya isn't really there yet. She's not at the point where she's questioning enough. And it's fascinating to watch her because I could see myself in her a lot. She's irritating in her way, you know, of the fact that she insisted on a full like sweep of the whole lighthouse and everything, even though they knew it was going to be empty. But she like, there is a procedure and we follow it for a reason. And I agree a lot of the time. So as much as she'll get under my skin sometimes, I'm also kind of like, ugh, maybe she gets under my skin so much because I fucking relate. So anyway, they're standing there and Lucan finally sort of comes back to himself and is like, they've been cut off. I don't get it. It feels like an island. They have been totally isolated. And the Emperor says, yep, something's walled it off. Any messengers who get far enough from town are turned back or destroyed. This has been true for months, and even watchmen could not escape the cordon, it seems. And they're waiting for him to give them orders, and then all of a sudden he crosses his legs and he sits in the dirt. And what we wind up finding out later, because like Shara is sort of wondering, oh man, okay, so are we close enough that we have been affected by whatever's going on with the boundaries around this place? She doesn't know. And we find out a little bit later, it seems like it is affecting the Emperor, but it's not really in a way I was expecting. I don't know what I was expecting, to be honest. The way it manifests is him like wanting to build a flying machine. And I'm extremely curious what the Elder's goal was here. If that, like, how directed was this action? Was the Elder like, yeah, we're going to have this Emperor build a flying machine because nobody else here is really capable of it. So now that I've got him, I'm going to have him do that. We're going to load it up with a bunch of these people who are like infected or something and like move on to other towns and try and bring this to other places. Was that going to be part of it? I am very, very curious about a lot of things. But he's thinking to himself, did he plan for this? 100 years ago, I could have dealt with this from my throne. Now I'm forced to come in person. Is that part of his trap? How far does the boundary extend? Could he do it himself, or did he need help? Did he have help? How many? Who? And this dude is just really starting to bug out. He doesn't have answers. He's realizing that he may have like been played a little bit more. As we find out later, he's like, I should have been here months ago fixing this. And he says, if I read the situation for myself, I'll only get worse. But if I don't, then I won't know anything. And he has this abrupt change of like, I need answers. Yeah, that's what I need. And his mood turns so quickly that for a minute, Shara is like, oh, fuck. Oh, God, did they get him? Is that what's happening? Because the last time they saw him have this, like, complete about face and attitude was when he was possessed by fucking Nkothi. So she checks in with Lucan, and it seems like he is okay. But the Emperor sends them all into the city, and he's like, I want you all to make a full report. So they all go in separate directions for a bit and get some disguises to wear into town. Maya's is like, of course, the one that's most textbook appropriate. Lucan's is going to totally work, but he will stand out slightly more. He's wearing like a scholar's outfit. And Shara is like just basically in clothing that makes her look like the poorest person, maybe a drunk, perhaps homeless, somebody that's not going to see her at all. Or something that's not going to cause her to be seen at all. Because they're in like, you know, outfits for a festival. And that's not the look she's going for. And she says, "No one will give me a second glance," she said defensively. "That's certainly true," Lucan responded, and somehow she felt as though she'd lost something. Every little bit of hint that we get that Shara cares so much about Lucan is agonizing. She just doesn't seem to understand what it is she's feeling. And she clearly cares about his opinions so much. And I just hate this for her. I just want her to, like, figure it out, you know? But, yeah, feeling as though she'd lost something. Well, yeah, a dude that you're into being like, "Well, you do look like shit." That's not the energy anybody wants. George says the Emperor's mood is so scary, too. Like, every thought, action, and weird thing could be him going insane or just typical undying, all-knowing ancient Emperor shit. Yeah, and I think that he captures that really well, with Shara just having to constantly be on guard again. It really... I don't know if I've made this comparison before, but it really reminds me of being in a household with somebody who's abusive. And the kind of awareness that you have to have, which results in later on being hypersensitive to everybody's moods around you and being really good at reading people because you had to be in order to not have the abuse directed at you. You had to be able to tell if they were on the edge of being angry or what made them happy so that you could do it again. It's just like an exhausting thing to live with. And when you're away from it, it's very stark, the realization that you have been living on eggshells, like just constantly afraid. And so Shara's like, it's such a strange thing because the situation that she's in, you know, when you're dealing with this from an abuser, they don't really see themselves necessarily as an abuser. They see everyone around them as the offending party, and they're the right one. Sometimes they'll be like, "I'm so sorry," but, you know, oftentimes not. And it's weird because the Emperor is aware. And sometimes he can be, like, dealt with, like, spoken to very specifically about the fact that he loses it. And he will be like, "Okay, well, this is what you need to look out for, and this is what you need to do." And then he'll be completely away from it, unaware of what he's in the midst of saying or doing, and how much that fluctuates, and the ways that the communication is so inconsistent amongst them, I find really interesting, because Shara has to be on guard all the time, but ultimately her orders are to kill him if he fucking loses it. And yikes. I mean, just having to watch out for somebody's moods all the time is so tiring anyway. But then you add on top of it that it's going to be your responsibility to fucking take them out if worst comes to worst, you know, like, too much. So Silverreach celebrated the anniversary of its founding with food stalls, bonfires, and children running everywhere in colorful costumes. And I love that Shara's just like, this is really dangerous. There's a lot of fire and there's a lot of wooden buildings, but that doesn't actually seem to be a problem. Everything is super chill, cheerful. People are laughing, they're dancing, they're telling jokes, they're singing. Everyone's having a great time. And she's like, this is super, like, this is the best, most happy town I've ever been to. But there's something really off about all of it. A fruit vendor selling roasted sugared apples had his desserts arranged from largest to smallest in his booth, but he had stopped sales as he busily rearranged them from smallest to largest. A line of people stood outside his booth, waiting for him to finish, but none seemed impatient. They laughed and joked and sang with the others in line, not one of them complaining about the vendor's unnecessary delay. It took her 3 or 4 seconds of close observation to notice the other disturbing detail. All their feet were pointed in precisely the same direction. And then Maya sort of dances by her, because they're all pretending to not know each other. They're not in a group. And just whispers, "Watch the birds." And then Shara notices the seagulls are all cawing together in time with each other. They flew in an exact grid, like soldiers in formation, and when they landed on a nearby roof, they did so at the same time. I can't even picture that. Like, the idea of all these birds landing simultaneously. It's just, my brain won't do it because it's just not how that works. You know what I mean? I can't help but picture like them landing in a gradual sort of, it's just really creepy. Children pointed up at the birds, laughing, and then returned to scratching some messages on the cobblestones. Shara moved a few steps to determine what they were writing, mathematical equations, clearly beyond anything a child should have understood. They didn't seem to make much sense either. They looked like nonsense. Then again, when you stepped back and looked at all the equations together, it almost seemed like they fit together, like the team of children was working to fill in a puzzle. She was staring at the stones, trying to work out the pattern. Now, I don't know about you guys, but when I was reading that she was staring at them and trying to work out the pattern, I was like, no, stop it. Stop reading it. Stop trying to make sense of it. The longer you stare at it, the more at risk you're going to be. I have no substance for this argument. Nothing to back it up, no evidence, nothing. I just felt like, stop. Don't do it. And there's something about this as well. Having the kids, you know, it's such a cliche in horror, or, well, no, really in horror. You're going to have like kids draw something really spooky that they saw, and the adults are going to be like, oh, what is this? This is your imaginary friend or whatever. And then they find out, no, this incredibly spooky thing is actually living in your house. It's living under the kid's bed. It's in the closet, whatever. But it's always like a creature, or it'll be like a real fucked up depiction of the family, you know, like it sort of seems to be a happy family picture on the surface, but then you look and see like one of them's holding a knife dripping blood. Mathematical equations. It's certainly not a thing that I'm going to be like, that's alarming on the face of it. You know, you tell me that's what they're doing, and I'm going to be like, huh. But in the context of everything else that's going on here, it is so scary, because that feels, it's not a kid reporting on a thing it's seen. Like, this is somebody is taking over these kids' brains. It's a step past creepiness into straight up possession. And I don't like it. It's almost the same as if you had a child like of 5 years old writing in flawless cursive and like full sentences kind of thing. Just something that's just, it doesn't, you know, it doesn't happen. That's not how that goes. So Lucan shows up, and he's like in a great mood. He walks arm in arm with her down the street, and she's just like, we're not even supposed to be seen together, really. Why is he so relaxed right now? And she asks, does anything feel strange to you? And he's like, there's a lot of people having a great time. And he says it really loud, and the folks around him hear and like raise their glasses to cheers. And then he goes up to this stall, and he just grabs a pork-filled bun off a rack right in front of the vendor. And she's like, okay, what the fuck is he doing? And she grabs her knife because she thinks that this is going to result in a fight because he's fucking stealing. But then she realized what had actually happened. At the instant Lucan had reached for the grill, some boxes had shifted on the table behind the vendor. He'd turned around, distracted for a split second, as Lucan snatched the food and moved back to Shara. When the vendor moved back to face the crowd, a smile on his face, the consultant was gone. So she's trying to ask him, did you do that? And he thinks at first she just means stealing the bun. And she's has to press him and be like, did you make the boxes move? And he's like, no. I just saw he was going to be distracted. And she's like, okay, but how, though? How did you see he was going to be distracted? And I really like that it says she never could figure out what readers could and couldn't do. There were rules, but the emperor and his students seemed to ignore them all. She tended to assume that a reader could do anything, which is low-key how I function with this also. I'm just like, okay, a reader can do that? Yeah, sure, he can. I believe you. I don't know, you know? So when she presses him, how did you know that was going to happen? Did you read that it was going to? And he finally, once she pushes him to really stop and think about it, he finally begins to realize, oh, yeah, I shouldn't have known. Should I? Huh. And she's walking and all of a sudden stops dead. This is the exact center of town. Is it? Shara looked around. It didn't seem much different than a dozen other places they'd passed. There was nothing to tell her, but she knew that her feet were planted in the middle of the town, and the center of the mysterious barrier that isolated Silverreach as well. 10 seconds passed as no one said anything. Lucan pulled out his writing board, using the corner to point to a girl holding a small cat. That girl's going to look down right now. The cat made a noise, and the girl looked down to see what was wrong. There are 24 birds on that building, Maya said. And he goes over and reads it and is like, she's right. And the house shook as though struck with a muffled thump that shook dust and splinters. It wasn't loud enough that it disrupted the celebration, though a few townsfolk took a healthy step back from the wall, but Lucan stepped away, satisfied. He turned his gaze to the roof. All the birds that had perched there took off. 24. And Lucan is like, okay, Joran proposed once that there was a method of sharing knowledge that involved merging the intent of 2 or more individuals, but that would mean we all had the exact same information. I couldn't have guessed how many birds were on that roof until Maya told me. Shara? And Shara's like, nah, and he's like, okay, so we're not sharing information. We're getting it from somewhere. And Maya asks where, and Lucan says, exactly. We really should go. And Shara has to, because Maya's like, well, we haven't finished our reconnaissance. We have to finish that and then leave. And Shara's like, no, we've got to fucking leave. And then they get interrupted by a man stepping up onto boxes and making a speech to everybody. And Maya's like, fine, we can go. And now Shara's like, no. Now this guy's here. I want to fucking hear what he has to say. And basically, this dude is wearing this like weird medallion. And it looked like silver, but was more likely painted tin or other cheap metal. The emblem was filled with detailed decoration that she couldn't identify at a distance, but it was clearly intended to resemble an open eye. And the symbol, the open eye was a symbol of significance in many elder cults, as people used it to represent the all-seeing eyes of the great elders or the vigilance one needed to watch for their return or something similar. Then again, it had also been used to signify 1,000 other things, including readers. So under normal circumstances, Shara wouldn't have given it a second glance. But these weren't normal circumstances. Elders were involved. So they stay and listen, and basically this guy is doing the whole, like, there's knowledge that could change our lives, and we could be practically immortal, and we could travel instantly, and they're keeping this, like, information from us. They won't tell us. And we have this memory of something that Maxwell had told her. They promise everything, but they never deliver anything. Only the worst kinds of people say they're selling the future. So we remember these techniques because the memories have been handed down from father to son. We don't know how. We're ordinary men and women just like you. But we know who does know. And the Empire is keeping the truth to themselves. And then he says, as all men know, that which sleeps will soon wake. And Shara is like, fuck, because that is the cult that What's-Her-Face belongs to in the other book. I am very curious about how that's going to go. But I'm trying to decide if this man is simply being influenced by the elder to say these things and he didn't believe them before, or whether this man is part of the cult and started this off happening here. I don't really know how one would even do that. If, like, you know, it's basically what I'm saying is what came first, the man preaching on the boxes or the elder beginning to awaken and experiment. So they get back to the emperor, and this dude is building a fucking ship. He's trying to build a flying ship. And they're explaining to him what is happening. And they're trying to get him to leave. And he says, I'm staying until I've finished. And this is when Cher's like, fuck. Okay, we have to get him out of here. This could be the moment where we like have to fight him. And they're not ready. And she says, why do you keep 3 gardeners with you? You have to know that sometimes you need someone else to make decisions, because sometimes, under some conditions, you can't. And she lets this sink in. This is one of those times. We need you to leave. Now. She'd been taught to use the subject's name when delivering a command, but calling him emperor would only remind him that he had the power, and she didn't know his real name, if he even had one. I thought that was really interesting, reminding him that he had the power by using his title, so she's just like, I'm not even doing that. That's one of those like split-second subtle decisions that I feel could make a big difference, you know? And the whole ship falls apart behind him. And then he begins talking about a library under this town, older than human civilization. And he says, I don't even think people invented books. I think we just like found this place and basically copied what they did. I always wondered how he didn't see it coming, why he didn't anticipate me and relocate. But he was always trying to learn, even at the end, and death is no great inconvenience to his kind. And Shara says a name, Ahmagut. And he says, in a way, the human world is his creation more than my own. He spared my life, gave me the education I needed to advance reading and build an empire. He's not a destroyer, he's a parasite. He leeches onto a world until he's learned everything he can, and then he moves on. He won't kill everyone. He will enact his plan without consideration for casualties, one way or the other. Though I came myself, I can no longer protect them. I should have gotten here months ago. And Lucan, as the emperor is finally like, all right, I guess we're leaving, he says to himself, if it's just Akhmagut, we have time, because he isn't as dangerous and destructive as some of the other great elders are. We'll have to deal with him, but he won't be finished for another like 10,000 years. And Lucan is like, but what about the town? And he just says, I can no longer protect my people. As soon as I heard the news, I should have accepted the death of this town. And he goes back to his ship, and that is the end of the chapter. And it's super depressing. I really feel for him, man. An entire town. And you feel like I should have been able to do something, and I probably could have. You know? Ugh. I hate this for him. I really feel for the Emperor. Like, he's a monster in some ways. And then there's moments like this where he really does seem to fucking care. And it's just, he's all over the place, you know? George says, yes, this whole thing gave me that vibe. Like, I would immediately leave. I don't want to understand any part of what's going on. Right? Jyrene is Calder's wife. Jyrene, thank you. I feel like I had trouble remembering her name when I was covering that book, too. But yeah, so this is a really interesting section. I feel like seeing the way that the elders affect things outside of major movements that are happening between like guilds and just, you know, everyday people, folks who aren't meant to be involved in the crazy shit of the Empire. It's it just feels so much more invasive and unfair. So I'm really excited to keep reading. So yeah, thank you, George, very much for commissioning this. And I will see you guys on Friday. Until then, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.